3 Indian sailors are dead. They were not caught in a war zone. They were not serving in a military operation. They were working aboard a commercial vessel in the Gulf of Oman. And according to India, they were killed in a strike carried out by the United States military. Now, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi prepares for a crucial bilateral meeting with US President Donald Trump on the sidelines of the G7 summit in France, one uncomfortable question hangs over the relationship. Will Modi confront Trump over the deaths of Indian sailors? Because this is no longer just about trade, it is no longer just about tariffs, and it is no longer just about Pakistan. This is now about Indian lives. Exactly 1 year ago, there was intense speculation over a Modi-Trump meeting during the G7 summit in Canada. That meeting never happened. Trump returned to Washington early. Modi continued with his engagements. In fact, the Indian PM politely declined an invitation by Trump to visit the White House. Now, fast forward to today, the bilateral is now confirmed. Prime Minister Modi is in France as a special invitee of French President Emmanuel Macron. This is his 7th consecutive G7 appearance, a remarkable diplomatic record that reflects India's growing global importance. But unlike previous meetings, this summit comes at a very difficult moment in India-US ties. And the biggest immediate issue is not trade. It is the death of 3 Indian seafarers. Now, over the past week, commercial vessels operating near the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman have come under attack amid the escalating US blockade of Iran that's going on. Now, one of those attacks killed 3 Indian crew members. India responded strongly, sure. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, in fact, even spoke to the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. India summoned the US chargé d'affaires in New Delhi, and Jaishankar publicly stated that lethal action against commercial shipping was not justified. Now, the expectation in New Delhi was perhaps that Washington would at least express regret, but that did not happen. Instead, the US doubled down. Secretary Rubio reportedly conveyed that commercial vessels must comply immediately with the US military instructions and that violations of that blockade would not be tolerated. In other words, Washington did not have any remorse. In fact, defended its actions. That makes the Modi-Trump meeting far more consequential than originally expected. Now, the sailors' deaths are not happening in isolation. They come after months of turbulence in India-US relations. Remember what has happened since Modi's last bilateral meeting with Trump in Washington. First came the tariff disputes, then came disagreements over Russian oil, then came Trump's repeated claims that he personally pressured India and Pakistan into a ceasefire after Operation Sindoor. Now, these very claims New Delhi consistently rejected. Then came perhaps the most controversial development, which is Trump's visible outreach to Pakistan. Pakistan Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir, in fact, has become a frequent visitor to Washington and to the White House. He has met senior figures across the American establishment, and that has raised questions in India about whether Pakistan is regaining strategic relevance in Washington. Now, add to this backdrop the deaths of Indian sailors. The atmosphere before this meeting is clearly very different from the warmth of the Howdy Modi and Namaste Trump era. Beyond the immediate controversy, however, 4 major issues are likely to dominate discussions. One is trade negotiations that have been stuck for months. An interim trade agreement, we've been told, is there, but progress has been slow. Both sides repeatedly say that a deal is close, yet the agreement remains unsigned. Meanwhile, India has moved aggressively elsewhere. Trade deals have been concluded or in advanced stages with multiple partners, including the UK, the EU, and other major economies. The question is simple. Can Modi and Trump inject political momentum into the stalled negotiations, or will trade remain a source of friction? Issue number 2 is energy security. And this remains perhaps the most fundamental disagreement. The Trump administration wants countries to reduce economic engagement with Iran and has long opposed purchases of Russian energy. India's position is equally clear. Energy security comes first. New Delhi buys oil based on affordability, availability, and national interest. That principle has not changed, and there is little indication that India intends to alter its energy strategy because of American pressure. Third, let's come to the Indo-Pacific. This is where the long-term strategic logic of the partnership is very, very strong. For Washington, India remains the critical balancing power in Asia. For India, cooperation with the United States actually provides important strategic benefits. The Quad continues to exist, defense cooperation continues, technology partnerships continue, yet both sides increasingly are viewing each other through a more transactional lens, so to speak. The relationship is no longer driven by sentiment, it is driven by interests. And then there is the issue number 4, that of the Indian diaspora. Nearly 10 million people of Indian origin live in the United States. Recent debates over migration, student visas, H-1B programs have created anxiety among many Indian families. Indian professionals continue to lead some of America's most influential companies. Yet concerns about visa restrictions, anti-immigration rhetoric remains significant. That too is likely to feature, of course, in the Trump-Modi discussions, hopefully. And then there is Pakistan. Pakistan today occupies a somewhat unusual position. It has attempted to position itself as a diplomatic player in West Asia, a mediator, if you please. It remains closely aligned with China, and it continues to attract attention in Washington. Now, for India, the concern is not whether America talks to Pakistan. That has happened for decades, frankly. The concern is whether Washington begins viewing Pakistan as strategically useful at India's expense. Now, that is something New Delhi will watch carefully, especially after Trump's outreach to Pakistan's military leadership. Ultimately, the most watched moment may not be what happens at the bilateral or even what appears in the joint statement, if there is one. It may be what happens behind closed doors. Will Modi directly raise the deaths of Indian sailors? Will he seek accountability? Will Trump offer an explanation or even regret? Or will both sides quietly move past the issue in pursuit of larger strategic interests? Because despite the current tensions, neither India nor the United States can afford a serious breakdown in ties. The economic stakes are just too high. The geopolitical stakes are even higher. But diplomacy is also about signaling. And after 3 Indian sailors lost their lives in an American military operation, many in India will be watching closely to see whether Modi carries that message directly to Donald Trump. The meeting is confirmed. The agenda is very crowded. But the question remains, when Modi and Trump sit across the table in France, will the conversation begin with trade and geopolitics, or with the 3 Indian sailors who never made it home?